Hi everybody, it's Dr. Wolf. This is going to be our quick day one video lecture to introduce attraction and relationships. What I'm going to do is in a second, I'm going to switch to the recording from last semester. So it's going to be a different classroom. It's going to be like the same recordings that I do normally. And what I've done is I've kind of edited that down to some of the most important points. And then I'll be back at the end for kind of a summary. Okay, cool.
So the first thing that I want everybody who's a psych major particularly, but also all humans to know is that we are a social animal, right? And being a social animal means that we seek to build relationships and connections with other humans. Now, that is a universal trait. It is a universal trait that we are social. It's a universal trait that we build relationships with other humans. Now, the type of relationship, the function of relationship, who the relationship can be with, all of that stuff is going to be very cultural, all right? Sometimes even idiosyncratic, right? But we are social animals, right? So much so that like babies are born seeking out human faces, right? Like instinctually, right? Babies also develop what we call the social smile, right? Which is that babies smile before they experience happiness in an attempt to create attachment and bonding with other humans. We need to have a sense of belonging, and we've already kind of talked about that, right? But that sense of belonging, the idea that you matter, right, to other people or that you belong to a community is really critical. And a lot of that goes back to the kinds of attachments or relationships that we're going to form. So we sometimes also call this a need for affiliation, right? That we need to have some kind of social contact with others. So that's a universal desire, right? Idiosyncratically, so you versus another person are going to differ on what is the optimal level of social contact versus alone time, right? And we have all kinds of words for that, like you probably like take this quiz, how much of an introvert or extrovert are you? Like the real key is that the amount of optimal social contact for you is going to be different than the optimal amount of social contact for someone else. And that all of us are just trying to find kind of that ideal balance, right? Between being with others and being by ourselves. And I think especially if we think about people who might be neuroatypical, that balance might be very different. The function of relationships can be very different, again, idiosyncratically and also culturally. So we're all just trying to find what is that perfect balance of time with others. I find time with others to be very draining most of the time. And so in our household, we call them social tokens. And I start the day with a certain number of social tokens, and when I run out, I am done with people. And I need to have some time where I am not with people to recharge, right? My best friend, however, has never met a stranger in her life. She talks to everyone all the time. Like, you could literally drop her in the middle of any coffee shop and suddenly she would be able to tell you like 3 people's whole life story, right? And if she doesn't have that contact, she withers like a houseplant. So she and I are very different in that regard. Knowing what is the best fit for her versus me, right, is kind of part of that life skill. When we think about who you might be affiliated with or who you might be attracted to, we tend to have this myth that that opposites attract. And that's cute. That is not supported by research. We tend to actually seek similar. And what do I mean by similar? Well, originally, this also included demographics, and we're noticing some changes with that. So we're going to talk about changing demographic similars in a bit. But it's really about opinions, interests, values, attitudes, life experiences, that sort of thing. And you know that because when you meet someone who has polar opposite worldviews to you, you don't usually react to that as, ooh, how can I spend more time with this person? Right? It's like, thank you, no. And then you move to people who are a little bit more seen as similar to you. We also have this idea, how many of you have had social psych? Okay, so in social psych, we sometimes also talk about what we call the matching hypothesis, which is the idea that you tend to seek people who have your same level of attractiveness. And when I say attractiveness, it's not just physical attractiveness. So you can also take into that things like status and power and stuff like that. So if I look at my whole package of physical attractiveness, status, power, yada, yada, and assign a number to that. Let's say I'm an 8. I'm going to look for other 8s. I'm not going to look for 3s and 4s. Now, that's why it's really important to remember that physical attraction is just one component in that mix, because all of you can probably in your head even visualize someone that you see as being very physically attractive that's with someone who is not as physically attractive. Chances are that's because the person has something else that raises their attractiveness, right? That's not physical beauty. We also tend to see people who have the same subjective experiences to us. Very common after some kind of historical event or disaster or trauma or something like that, that people who have the same, who have gone through it as well, will tend to form relationships with each other. And that's because you were there with me. You know what it's like. You've been through it too, right? That kind of thing, right? Again, because we tend to look for people who are similar to us. Now, the opposite thing, of course, can be true, but it's usually for things that are much, much smaller than like worldview and life experiences. It's things like how they load the dishwasher, whether or not they want the house clean to a certain level. Those tend to be the more opposite parts, as opposed to, again, these kind of core pieces of who you are, like your opinions and attitudes on like how the world should be. Does that make sense? So we tend to filter out people who we see as very dissimilar to us and continue contact with people who are more similar to us. Now, I said that thing about demographics, but it's changing. What we're finding in current research, so this is from the Pew Center, what we're finding is that we're seeing more marriages now between people who have different racial or ethnicity identities or different faith-based identities. That was not always the case, right? But we are seeing those are both on the rise. So the idea that we also pick people who are like similar demographics to us used to always be true, and now we're starting to see that is changing. And it's one of the reasons why we have to keep up with demographic research so that we're, aware of some of those things. Hopefully you've all noticed that psych people tend to build categories and models, right? Like those are two of our favorite things to do. Of course, we have done that with relationships because it's our favorite thing to do. So we actually have a model of relationships. It's the ABCDE model. A stands for attraction, so that's what we're talking about right now. Then we go into a building phase, right, where people start to bond or find things in common, start to build that relationship. Then we go into C for continuation, which is where you continue to work on a cyclical growth for that relationship, right? Like actually getting more invested into that. We might see commitment actually being in there. Or we might start moving towards what's an idea of mutuality, which is where you see yourself as part of a group or a couple, right? As opposed to a singular I. Then some relationships would experience a D phase, which is for deterioration, which is where the relationship starts to deteriorate. If there's no intervention to get it back on track, it would then end through separation. If a relationship does not experience the deterioration phase, conceivably it would go continuation and then end through death. So that's what our letters stand for. So the first part of that is about attraction. When we scan the environment for people, who are we going to be attracted to? That's going to be idiosyncratically different for everybody, right? You might have particular qualities or features that you as a person look for. But that if we look research-wise, overarchingly, you're going to look for someone that's a little similar to you, right? More similar than dissimilar to you. Now, when we think about attraction, most of the time, if I say I'm attracted to somebody, you're going to hear sexual attraction, right? Like there's just kind of this understood that if I say, oh, that person's really attractive, we think sexual or physical. But you can also be attracted to people in a lot of different ways. So we're going to talk about mainly the idea that you have a sexual orientation and a romantic orientation. And that's just your pattern of attraction, either sexually or romantically towards other humans. two studies here that are where do you meet a partner? And they're both fairly old. One is much older, but they both say about the same thing. We tend to find and this is literally like marriages, we tend to find the person that we're married to either by introducing ourselves or being introduced by others in the context of either at work or school, or solely through family and friends introducing you to that person. So there's a lot of overlap, regardless of the fact of how many years are between these, that we tend to see that that's very common. Now I picked both of these because there are two problems with this. Or there's two things I want to kind of highlight. Notice how this one has 12% met on an online dating site, and this one had none. What do you think? There are two possible reasons. There's two possible reasons as to why there's 12% here and 0 here. What do you think one of those reasons might be? The year. Well, the year's a big one, right? So 1994, AOL, America Online, launched its monthly subscription service in 1995. And that was the first time that a swath of people who had no technical skills went online. There were not online dating sites at that time. There were chat rooms and there were chat forums, but there were not the traditional online dating site as you see now, right? So the year is going to be a big one. What else about this one? Yeah.
Was conducted for eHarmony.
Right, conducted for eHarmony by the ORC International, which is a research group. Some of you may remember that there was a question on the exam. I do that on purpose, right? Wizard behind the curtain, because this is real. That means this study was conducted by an international research group specifically for eHarmony, which is an online dating site. The example that was on the exam actually talked about getting a grant, right? Being grant funded, right? The same thing's true here, right? And the idea that they got some kind of money, were employed by an online dating site, and then suddenly we got 12%. So big impact is going to be, we didn't have them here. But with this one, even if I just look at this one, I want to think to myself, why did they come up with 12%? How did they come up with 12%? Did they, now, of course, they could have just falsified it, but chances are they didn't just actually commit fraud. But instead, so I could have sampled in such a way to guarantee me that I would at least have a significant pie slice that was going to be online dating. I might have advertised in forums that might have also led to that. And while that's not considered research fraud, it does kind of stack the deck. And so what we want to do as good researchers is we want to see what other studies happened about the same time. Do they collaborate this, or does this one stand out on its own? If this one stands out on its own, we got a problem. Maybe we don't want to pay attention to this one. I will say though, what we find, however, is that of course online dating is absolutely on the rise. This again comes from the Pew Center, and what you can see is the difference between 2015 and 2019. I believe is the last time they asked this question. So just a couple of years back. The percentage of U.S. adults who say they have ever used a dating site, and we jumped from 15 to 30% in 4 years for all U.S. adults. And then you can kind of see the difference by relationship status and that sort of thing. If you actually go to the article, you can see they also looked at it by generation, and they found that, and they did not have the information on Z's for this one because again it was 2019. In 2019, Z's had just turned 18 or 19, and we tend not to do relationship research on them, on people who are below 18, because that would be teen dating, and that's a whole different category of research, right? So, but anyway, so millennials, 65% of never married millennials say they have at least used it, 53% for Gen Xers, and it goes down to 29% for baby boomers, but of course that should make sense. Because of the technical divide between the generations. So the vast majority of people, of course, are in fact using online dating sites. That 30% is only when we look at all adults. But when we break it up into generations, you can see that what's pulling that down is going to be our baby boomers. Now, if we go back up here, that is the national, it's something life survey. But anyway, This was all people who were married, and this was all people who were married. And so these samples came before 2010. Who could not be legally married before 2010? People who identify as what?
LGBTQ.
That's right. So there was not marriage equality in either of these two samples, which means both of these samples then would be on people who identified as heterosexual. So then the other question we want to ask as good researchers is, can we find articles that are from about the same time period that focus on LGBTQ partnerships, and where did they come from? And I've done that. I got two from those 90s, one from 2008. And they say about the same kinds of things, where that people tend to meet people either by introducing themselves or being introduced by someone else. And the main spheres for those introductions tend to occur at work or school. Some of the differences is in 93, that one article found that many lesbian relationships actually started as a friendship, and that they found more of that in lesbian relationships than in other relationships. And in the 2008 one, they found that people who identified as gay, lesbian, or bisexual were much more likely to use online profiles at the time than people who identified as heterosexual at the time. And that those sometimes were much more likely to actually have resulted in something when compared to people who were heterosexual. And I think, again, that makes sense. We've already talked about a little bit about how being so close to Atlanta gives us a very different perspective of the South and of diversity. And what many people don't realize, because Atlanta is kind of thought of as a gay mecca, that people like flock to Atlanta if they have some diversity in them, that you pick any cardinal direction and drive 2 hours and you're in a very different place. And you may be in a place where it's very unsafe to be still to this day. And you may also be somewhere where there is actually not a nightlife or club that is specific for you. We actually happen to know that the number of lesbian bars has dramatically shrunk in the United States over the last 15 years to where there's only a handful of lesbian bars still open. There are much more gay clubs than lesbian clubs. Still, there's lots of places in the South where there's not one at all. And maybe the one that you have could also be dangerous. It makes instinctual choice then that I would maybe use the internet to seek out a partner more than other people, because I don't have that context of being able to go safely to work or school or a nightclubs kind of setting to meet people, because it either doesn't exist or it's not a safe place for me. Let's talk a little bit about online dating. Your textbook cites this study about opening lines in this chapter. And the study is from 1986, which I hope you all know was a hot minute ago. So usually we consider anything of over like 15 or 20 years to be pretty outdated. So here's the original article that your textbook cites, because I went and found it. And what they did was, and it's actually kind of a really cute design, is they got the sample of people and talked to them about opening lines, and was able to categorize those lines into 3 categories: direct, innocuous, and cute or flippant. And so the direct approach were things like, we're supposed to be direct, right? Like, hi, I like you. Whereas cute and flippant were kind of what we think of as opening lines, like, isn't it cold? Let's make some body heat. Yeah. Whereas innocuous, usually, unlike direct, hid that you were interested in, like, maybe building a relationship, but masqueraded as kind of like a conversation starter. So, do you live around here? Do you like this movie? One of the things I think is really cute about this one is they did it in several contexts. Kind of opening lines have been used on you in these contexts. And they had general, bars, restaurants, laundromats, beaches, and stuff because of where they were. I just love the laundromat. Again, because it's from 1986, this was important enough that they had a whole section in the research on laundromat. Let me help you fold your clothes. Do you live alone? Are you doing laundry for 2? So then I was like, has anyone done this since? There wasn't. But if we were to update it, I would say we would have to have a 4th category that's the gross offensive category. Because I think what happens a lot is that people who either don't online date or have only had certain experiences in online dating are not really aware of kind of the breadth of experiences that people have with online dating, right? First of all, lots of sites are out there. Tinder, that's kind of considered our gold star standard at this point. Tinder's changed the industry. What else? Hinge, Bumble. What makes Bumble special?
The girls get the whole time.
You may not send the first message unless you mark yourself as a woman. Why, and I love, for the people who don't know, why would that be a selling feature?
A lot of times you have to describe.
Because a lot of times the first message is a gross message. So either just a picture unbidden of people's genitals or other kinds of statements like, hey, can you send me your nudes? Are you looking to hook up? Like as the first message. And so an entire site sells itself by saying you should get less of those because only people who mark themselves as women can send the first message. What are some other ones?
Grindr.
Grindr, thank you. So our other Tinder's payer then is Grindr. What else? Anybody still on OkCupid? That's an older one. There's Farmers Only, right? Christian Mingle, Plenty of Fish, right? So it's a huge industry. So I saw a TikTok this morning that was from someone who specializes in game design, talking about how many people who actually build these apps are actually using game design mechanics to get you to engage with the app in different kinds of ways. But what they sell is this idea that with very low effort on your part can filter out undesirable people and focus on people who are desirable. So that's what they're selling. One of the problems though is one of the commercials that's for like, I believe it was a Tinder commercial that makes the rounds from time to time is the person looks into the camera and says, I just didn't have time to date. So I was able to find my person on blah. The dating is not the time suck. Okay, it may feel like a time suck because you're having a certain amount of wasted effort, but that's actually not the time suck. You do not have enough time to date means that you do not have enough time to devote yourself to caring for the emotional needs of another human. Because what dating is I'm going to gussy myself up a little bit and go out and waste a couple of hours on something that didn't work out, as opposed to being in a relationship with someone that needs to be nurtured and developed. Because again, we are selling this idea that the part that's hard is the dating and that relationships should be easy. What are some of the ways that you have heard that in our society, this idea that if you're with the one, it should go well? How do you know that you found the one? What is supposed to happen? Yeah.
After communication.
Right, easy communication, like we just get each other, right? Like we don't have to work at it, they just know. What else? Yeah.
Communicate 24/7.
That we would be talking all the time and not like, there wouldn't be like that lull, right? Where you run out of things to say, like you always have something new to say, right? Yeah.
So like they don't argue.
Why would we argue? We're on the same page about everything. Remember, that goes back to that cognitive fallacy that we have, that we think someone's like us or we like them, right? We overassume how similar they are. But again, very common message, right? That we wouldn't have disagreements or fight because we're on the same page about everything. What else? We have the same interests, and we have the same interest on day one. And we don't have to nurture those or learn, like, now what is this thing that you like to watch on the TV with the ball? Like, what is that, right? Or what is the thing you like to do that's over here with the pages? Like, what is that, right? Like, we don't have to learn that, we would know them. What else? How do you know you've picked the one? What else is always going to go smoothly?
Like meeting friends and family.
They're going to get along with everybody. Your mother is going to love them. Your father is going to love them, right? Your friends are going to love them. Yeah.
You're on page with your future.
We have the same goals for life. And then the sex is supposed to be great too, right? And that we also don't have to communicate about the sex, just do it. And then suddenly like, boom, orgasms at the same time to fireworks. right? And stuff with no coordination or rehearsal and stuff. So we have all these messages that if you have the right human, everything's going to be easy. Well, as a relationship counselor, I'm going to tell you that's garbage because life is not easy. And so are you going to disagree with someone? Well, probably, because we, again, overemphasize this, we make this cognitive fallacy that we're going to be the same. So chances are you're not going to be the same about everything. Even if we have the same interest on day one, new things may happen, right? And what if one of us likes it and the other one doesn't? Or we decide to develop a new hobby. We do not sexually communicate well in our society. And so the idea that the very first time that you have sex, it's just going to be to fireworks, a little setting yourself up for failure. So again, we sell this myth that the hard part is the finding of the person and that everything becomes easy once you found them. And that is very problematic for actual adult relationships. That is not reflected in the research, it's not reflected in the practicalities of life. We also sell this idea that, especially to men, that if you just have the perfect opening line, right, it's going to lead to relationships. But yes, there has to be something where you become interested or attracted in another person. How do you start, again, going back to our model here, how do you move from attraction to building? And opening lines are interesting, right? Because they do kind of tell us some of the experiences that people have when engaging with online dating or even in-person dating. But what we actually know that moves someone from attraction to a building phase is moving into self-disclosures. And of course, you wouldn't start with a self-disclosure necessarily, right, as an opening line. But moving from small talk like, and how was your day, the self-disclosures tends to be a sign of deepening empathy, right? Deepening intimacy, not empathy, intimacy. And what we know is that, and we'll talk about this more next time, is that when you disclose things about yourself to other people, that makes them like you more. And then you disclosing things to other people actually makes you like them more. And makes you more likely to disclose and makes them more likely to disclose. It becomes this cycle of self-disclosure. We can also talk about the commonality piece. Actually discovering what we do have in common as opposed to my assumptions about our commonalities.
Hey everybody. So again, that was the recording from, I believe, spring. And what I did was I cut out a lot of the times where I paused to ask for questions or got questions from the class, or some of the times where I was really reiterating points that I do sometimes when we're face-to-face as opposed to a video lecture. So I'm going to show you a QR code and have the hyperlink in just a second for the attendance. What I'm going to ask you to do is to provide examples of those 4 types of opening lines, things that are more modern than that article from 1986. And then what we're going to start with on Tuesday is actually showing you what people's examples were and talking about how we would go forward with more modern research into online dating before we move into talking about attraction diversity, types of attraction that people can have, but also some of the words that we use. You've seen some of those videos by this point, hopefully by Tuesday again, because you're keeping up with the other readings and videos and content that are in the module, okay? So I'll see you Tuesday face-to-face, and I look forward to seeing what your questions are and your examples for the attendance survey, okay? Great.